How to enable 4K at 120 frames per second for your PS5 on your 120 Hz monitor or TV. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this episode, I want to share with you how to get 4K at 120 frames per second for your 120 Hz monitor or TV for your PlayStation 5. I also want to share with you exactly what that changes on top of just getting the 4K at 120 frames per second. So make sure you stay until the end of the video so you catch that part. If you enjoy any part of this video or find it helpful, let me know by giving this video a like. And if you're new to the channel, this is the spot where you can find the latest tips, tricks, and strategies for your PlayStation gaming experience. So be sure to subscribe down below if you'd like to watch more videos just like these. Let's get right into it. So you just opened up your brand new PlayStation 5 game for the first time, and you start running it and you notice something like this. 120 Hz refresh rate is actually disabled, even though you have the right equipment for the job. Why is that? Well, actually, you have to turn on a setting that allows the PlayStation 5 to actually tell the TV that it's okay to run the game at 4K at 120 frames per second. The first thing you want to make sure that you have before you even enable 120 Hz refresh rate or 120 frames per second, you want to make sure that you're using the original HDMI high-speed cable that came with your PlayStation 5 or a compatible high-speed HDMI cable that will run 4K at 120 frames per second. If you do not use this kind of HDMI cable, then you will not be able to run 4K 120 frame per second games. Also, you need to have a TV that supports 4K at 120 frames per second. Now for this video, I'm using the LG C10 OLED TV. If you see it online or at the store, you'll see that the label says CX, but I guess it's pronounced C10. But anyways, that kind of TV and other TVs like that support HDMI 2.1. HDMI 2.1 allows you to run these new PlayStation 5 games at 4K at 120 frames per second. So you want to make sure that if you're about to get a brand new TV or you already have one, that it does have the HDMI 2.1 port that is hooked up through the high-speed HDMI cable to your PS5. Once you have all those things hooked up, you can then run 4K at 120 frames per second on your 120 Hz refresh rate monitor or TV. So once you check all that off the list, you then want to go into the settings and actually enable the PS5 to start running 4K at 120 frames per second. So the way to do that is you actually need to go all the way back into the home screen. You can do that by holding the PlayStation button on the controller or just tapping it and going down to the home icon. And then once you're back at the home screen, you wanna go up to this gear icon on the top right, which takes you to the settings menu. And then you wanna go all the way down to where it says save data and game app settings. This is a very weird spot to have this 4K 120 frames per second setting, and it's buried in here, but you gotta find it in order to turn it on. So you go into it and then you finally go down to where it says game presets. Once you go into the game presets menu, by default, the PlayStation will actually have it set for game default under performance mode or resolution mode. In order to run your games at 120 frames per second or 120 Hertz, you need to actually change this over to performance mode. Once you select performance mode, this allows the PlayStation to run these PS5 games at a higher frames per second. Once you change that setting, you want to double check that you're actually running the game at a higher frame rate. And you first want to do that by closing out of the game entirely. So for this video, I'm using Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. I closed out of the game entirely, and then I'm going to go back into it. And then you want to go back into your settings menu of that game and go to where it says display or graphics. And then you want to go down to where it says 120 Hertz refresh rate. If it's enabled, then you'll know that that game is running at the higher frames per second. Now, if you want to triple check that the game is actually running at the higher FPS, what you want to do is you want to go back to the settings menu, and then you want to go down to where it says screen and video, and then you want to read out the video output information of your PS5 after you made that settings change. If you are in fact running that higher FPS on 4K, you'll see up here on resolution, it'll say 3840 by 2160 at 120 Hertz. That confirms that you are running at the higher FPS for your 120 Hertz monitor or TV. Especially with these higher frame rates, you want to make sure that you're running game mode on your TV to make sure that you're reducing your input lag as much as possible between your PS5 DualSense controller and the console itself. You can do that by going into your settings menu for picture, and making sure that you are in fact in game mode. But if not, you can change that into game mode pretty easily. Depending on the manufacturer of your TV, it should be no problem. But I just wanted to make that a quick point so that if you notice that there's any extra input lag that you're experiencing with the higher FPS, to make sure that you're in game mode for your TV. Now this part I'm pretty bummed out about, and it is the difference between 60 FPS and 120 FPS. And that is that you are losing some of that visual fidelity as a compromise to have the faster frames per second. I didn't know this when I bought the PlayStation 5, and it's something I'm noticing now once I changed this to the higher FPS. Now for games like Call of Duty, where it's faster paced and every millisecond counts in reaction time, I actually prefer the higher frames per second. But if it's for a slower paced game, I'll probably want to change that setting back to the default so that I do get a lower frame rate but more visual fidelity. So what the higher frame rate actually does to your system is it backs off on some of the really cool visuals that the PS5 promoted, like ray tracing and really cool shadowing and lighting elements. And it seems like the game is saying that you're actually losing some of those features as a result of turning up the FPS. Now, I hope this is just for the earlier games in the PlayStation 5 life cycle, that they run 4K at 120 frames per second, but can't quite include more lighting elements like ray tracing. And I hope in the future that they do include that for the PlayStation 5 in the future for games, that you get 4K at 120 frames per second and ray tracing. I know Sony said that they're going to come out with a firmware update later on this year that will include compatibility for VRR, or variable refresh rate, and I see this going in the right direction for Sony and the PlayStation 5. This is exciting that Sony is including a VRR update in the future, and I see this as a hopeful sign that there may be some improvements to PS5 games going forward, where they may in fact include 4K at 120 frames per second and ray tracing. So I mentioned earlier on in this video that I'm using the LG C10 OLED TV. I published a video review on YouTube of this TV. I also talk about some extra features that this OLED TV offers, and I'll leave it up here and down in the description below. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. As always, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe so that you can always stay up to date on my latest helpful PlayStation videos just like these. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.